Hit record. Now it's recording. Good. Now go back to the other one.
Varsity basketball.
Whoa.
Which school is that?
And this is Great Neck South and
Oh, really?
soccer.
Ah,
All right, we're recording.
we are
I'm
live and in
surprised it's
color.
still haven't
All right.
crumbled.
What are you doing?
We want to make this louder.
No, I do it back there.
Okay.
I'll do it fast.
So Gedalia, this is Mark Berkowitz, our fearless leader. He's president of the synagogue, and he's going to do the honors. And if he leaves anything out, then I'll tell the truth in between. How's that?
Okay.
This is our maiden voyage, as you know. The
Oh,
first
nice.
of
Shechianu.
hopefully many such sessions, and we're delighted to have you as our keynote speaker here today. I'm going to read your introduction here for the record.
Before you do,
Uh-oh.
Yes.
let's take, because this is the picture we're recording. I don't think that's the picture we want. So you don't want the Mickey Mouse above his head.
Good.
Much better.
Okay.
Good.
It's, what are we, October 21st? This is the 25th anniversary of the 87 crash. And does everyone know that?
No?
It's true. It is. It's true. And so bigger and better things lie ahead. Rabbi Gedalia Gerfein has one foot firmly planted on earth and the other in heaven. And on earth, he's renowned as a technology visionary, a gifted marketer, and winner of the prestigious Demo God Award, who's been featured on Good Morning America, in the New York Times, Wired, Time, and Forbes. On the spiritual side, Gedalia is a compelling high-energy speaker and insightful Torah scholar who has worked closely with modern-day Talmudic genius Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. He was director of Discovery Seminar International and has worked with Aish HaTorah, Israelite, Birthright, and more. His talk on Judaism and spirituality will bridge heaven and earth with good humor and inspiration, and we are more than delighted to welcome you here, and we begin the begin.
All right. Well, after that introduction, all I could say is, can you hear me? There's something wrong with the... Just kidding. Okay, so I'm not allowed to turn the camera, but I will just let you know that I have a spy sitting over here next to me. My mother, who actually lived in Fairfield for 2 years in the 1970s, 80s, 70s, 80s. Milchik, Fleishik. And so it's really very nice that she gets to join as well. Okay. So what I thought we could try to, first of all, I want to thank everybody very much for taking the time. It's really kind of cool when you think about technology. Here I am sitting in Jerusalem. Here you are sitting in Iowa. And it's the day, it's the night. And it really made me think about a lot of the ideas that I hope to be able to share with you this morning or this afternoon or this evening. And one of them really is, like, what is the word now? I mean, who and what is now? Is where you are now? Is where I am now? I mean, how do we put together in real time? This is actually one of the problems that people who develop the internet deal with, which is the concept of internet minutes. In other words, how do we create a sense of where is the now that's actually happening? And when we speak about this idea of the now, sorry, let me just get here for 1 second. Speaking about the idea of the now, one of the sacred names of God, which is the name of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, actually is a conjugation of 3 words of was, is, and will be, meaning that the name of God is actually the word now. It's the all now. It's only as human beings who we live as in chronological timelines do we have a concept of the word then. Because then can be a reference to the past, then can be a reference to the future. But from a godly perspective, there is no then. There's only a state of actually being now. It kind of reminds me, back in the 60s, there was a Baba Ram Das who produced his famous book called Be Here Now. And so the idea of inside the now is actually the intersection point between where the spiritual and the physical worlds unite. In the second of each moment of reality is where these two worlds create friction, and through friction creates the capability for action, and through action creates the ability for change. Change is a unique reality in this facet of the world, which we're going to go drilling down into this afternoon. The main thing I wanted to highlight, though, just as a little side point here, when you start to think more about this idea of now, and God understands now as the perpetual now, just a digression, but it's kind of cool. A lot of times people think of the concept of reincarnation as again, a chronological event. A person is born, they live, they die, and then they come back in the quote unquote future as a new reincarnation. But if you think about it for a minute, it gets a little funky, but if you think about this, really, reincarnation is not necessarily chronological. So that a person could be reincarnated hundreds of years earlier than they were ever born. Because from the godly perspective of everything in the now, since the function of reincarnation is to elevate, or what we call in Hebrew, tikkun, to rectify the soul, to enable it to come to a higher level, so then as long as it's in the environment that it needs to be in, through which it can elevate itself, it doesn't really matter if it's in a time later than when that person lived, or hundreds of years earlier when it lived, or maybe even the baby in the very next crib next to the person who's just been born, but this baby is already the reincarnation of this baby that was just born. I mean, we'll leave it there. There's a lot you can think about with that. And that concludes today's class. Thank you very much. Okay, bye. So that's just something when you kind of upscope and think about it from the godly position of everything in the now. The problem, of course, is the Rambam's famous question. The Rambam wrote a book called the Mor Nevuchim, which is translated often as the Guide to the Perplexed. My rabbi, however, used to call it the Guide to Become Perplexed, because you walk away more confused than when you began. But one of the Rambam's questions in there is, if God is this now, meaning God is all-knowing, and it's also interesting that the word now is inside the word know, but if God is all-knowing, then where do we as human beings have free will? How can we do something under the concept that the basic modus operandi of being human is free will? How do we operate with free will if God knows everything? So many of the commentators offer three classic answers to this idea, or suggest answers. One of them is, guess what? We only think we have free will. In other words, from the godly perspective, there really is no free will, but we as are within the spectrum of the world that we live are allowed to function as if we have free will. Another idea is that really free will is only on the level of thought. It's not on the level of action. And this is hinted at in a very mystical Gemara, the Talmud, that says, asks the question, where did the ark, which I'm sure everyone saw the Spielberg movie, so you know the reference, where did the ark that had the tablets from Moses, how much space did it occupy? Because in one area of the Torah, it says that the distance between the two walls where the ark sat was 20 amot. In another text, however, it says the distance from one wall to one side of the ark was 10 amot. The ark was 10 amot, and the distance on the other side of the ark to the wall was 10 amot. So you have on the one hand a scripture defining the distance from wall to wall as 20, and then you have another set of scripture that seemingly 10 plus 10 plus 10 equals 30. And so in true Talmudic form, it answers the ark exists and doesn't exist. It occupies no place in this world, even though it's the essence of this world. And the metaphor is for thought. Really, we are what we think. Our mind is that which is the most important part of our existence. And yet thoughts have no physical substance, even though they kind of control everything that we do in the world. So in this kind of strange quagmire between form and not form, the idea of thought, in a way, is the overlap, the intersection between a spiritual world and a physical world. Therefore, how we choose within that synapse of a moment of our thought, that is the spectrum of our free will. The third approach is, I don't know if you guys ever had this when you were a kid growing up, but sometimes you got them in Cracker Jacks. Although I hear now in Cracker Jacks you get Nobel Peace Prizes. But when we were kids, you used to get one of those little plastic things, and it had 10 spaces, but there were only 9 numbers, and they were out of order, and you had to keep shoving them around until you could finally get them 1 through 9. So in a way, and we're going to get back to this, in Kabbalah we talk about the 10 sfirot, which we'll come to later. But there are these 10 types or spaces of creation, but there are only 9 components, and our job is to keep moving them until we get them in order. That's our free will, is how are we going to move these numbers? Now, if you don't have any concept of time, like if you're God, so then the time it takes one person to move those numbers within a split second, and the time it takes another person to move those numbers might take him 5 minutes, but ultimately the fact that it goes from, let's say, 0 to 10, there's no time. So each of us had our free will, how long it took, but that's only because we existed within the realm of time. But without time, God, so to speak, could already know that it's already going to be that 1 through 10. These are side points of what we want to deal with today, but they just kind of create the background of the space that I really wanted to get to. Let's take it now to the next section, which I titled here, Time and Space and the 7 Facets of Creation. From the Kabbalistic point of view, when the Bible or the Torah talks about the 7 days of creation, very few rabbis or scholars believe that this means 7 24-hour days. They highlight the fact that it was only on Wednesday, Yom Revi'i, that the sun and the moon, which create that 24-hour spectrum, is actually only first put into place. They highlight that if you look carefully, because it was only a couple of weeks ago, we should remember this, that it says Yom HaSheni, Yom HaShlishi, it says the second day, the third day, and so on, but it doesn't say Yom Rishon. It says Yom Echad. It says one day. And from there, the Kabbalists learned that, in fact, everything was created instantly in that one day. And then it was parceled out among the other 6 days. And so really, when we look at creation, there was a great rabbi known as Rabbi Yaakov, who lived in the city of northern Israel called Akko, about the year 700 AD. He's the one that validated the Zohar as having been authored by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And he said that the physical creation of the world is about 15 billion years long, which is pretty close to the number the Hubble is sending back. But therefore, what does it mean, the 7 days of creation? It means that there are 7 facets of time and 7 facets of space with which we exist. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but somebody from the BBC once told me that, and it's definitely cool if it's not true. He said that the word news is actually an acronym of North, East, West, South. It's kind of like what's going on in all 4 directions. And then, of course, you have up and down. These 6 directions are the 6 days of the work week. You could visualize it as a cube. We actually use the symbol of the Star of David. The Star of David has its 6 outer points. To move in space requires time. So therefore, if you're moving in the north, you are downloading, so to speak, from a Tuesday. If you're moving into the south, you're correlating more with a Thursday. So each facet of space requires time, because you need time to be able to move through space. We calibrate space and time one against the other. We say 80 miles per hour. It's that relationship of time and space. In fact, if you look at each other in the room, you could say, okay, Dean is 5 or 7 feet away from Fred. But you could also say that Dean is 1.5 seconds away from Fred, because there's no way that Dean could move to Fred's space in his current now. He needs to move through time in the same way that he needs to move through space. So this 7 days of creation is the enabling factor to move within the 7 directions of space. But the 7th type of time is the center. It's the center versus the circumference. It is the Shabbat. It's the time of non-movement. And that's why its day is the Shabbat. And that's why the root of the word Shabbat is connected to the same word in Hebrew as Sheva, which means 7, because it's the time in day in which there is no movement. Now, just to sidestep for a minute, if you take this to the next level, if you have 7 types of time and 7 types of space, so every aspect of time and space is 49. This is 7 times 7. This is why there are 49 days from Passover to Shavuot. Shavuot is now the 50th day. Passover is the coming out of the physical world. Shavuot is the reception or the receiving of the spiritual world. The world for Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim comes from the root word tsar, or those of you that speak a little Yiddish might know the word tsuris, which means uptight or problems. You've got a lot of tsuris. That's the word tsar. Tsar means narrow, literally. The yud mem sofit at the end of the word means lots of them, plural. And the mem at the beginning of the word means from. So mitzarim, coming out from being very uptight. And what kind of a person is somebody who is very uptight? What would such a leader be called? He would be called Pharaoh. In the more correct Hebrew pronunciation, the biblical Hebrew, the word Pharaoh actually means peh, mouth, ra, the evil mouth, the foul mouth. One of the ways that you can tell the evolutionary development inside a person's spiritual being is by the way that they speak. If they speak kindly, if they speak with wisdom, but when they speak vulgar or they speak with a foul language, this becomes the paro, the foul-mouthed leader of the word of Mitzrayim. How do you break out of being the foul mouth? You open your mouth and kvetch. You say anything. You say ouch. You say something. And this is called pesach. Pe is the mouth. Sicha is to talk. It's the most primitive form of talking. There's a higher level called daber. There's the highest level called omer. But the lowest level of talking is sicha. So Passover in Hebrew is called Pesach. It's the mouth now opens in order to be able to create a puncture to come out of that. That's why we go from Passover into the counting of the Omer. I don't want to get too much into which letters and why they are interchangeable. It sounds kind of like the rabbi with a little bean under the 3 cups saying, okay, now I can do this and now I can do that. But let's just say that there is an idea that when God created the world, the metaphor of the Bible is speech. And it doesn't really mean that there's like a big Mick Jagger yaya out there and refrigerators and DVDs and all these things are coming into existence because God is talking. It means that sound is that which takes a perfect harmony, which is the world pre-creation, symbolized by the letter Aleph, where all is one, and by putting vibrations and sound in between this, again, only as a metaphor, atomic structure, these become the algorithms upon which, again, metaphorically, spiritual molecules take shape and entities come into being. That's the faculty through speech that God uses in order to create the world. This is hinted at when God says to Adam, name the animals. I mean, what happened here? God like had writer cramp or something? Like, you know, you're like, wow, man, the 6 days were really awesome. Adam, you want to just take over here and just throw some names around the room? You know, but what Adam was actually doing was putting a stethoscope on, a spiritual stethoscope. And when he put it on the side of the animal, he heard the word dog, 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 because he heard the voice that God spoke through which this thing physicalized around it. In fact, there's a little cute joke. You have to know a little Hebrew, but I'll explain it to you anyhow. This is taught to me by a rabbi from Australia, as you'll suddenly see. So when Adam's standing on the line, he looks down and he sees, like at the end of the line, these little baby animals, they're freezing. And he goes over and he notices that the mommy has a pouch. And he opens the pouch and he picks it up and he says, kangaroo, which in Hebrew means, here you will live. So I guess, maybe that, okay, never mind. I'll skip the Hebrew jokes. Anyhow, but But this idea, therefore, of speech means that when the world is operating, that which brings thought into the world is the power of speech. That's actually the idea of what's the unique component of man. The first letter in the Bible is the letter Bet. I'm actually going to play a little bit with the name of your synagogue of Beth Shalom. So the first letter of the word of the Bible is the word Bet, from the word Bereshit. Bereshit is often mistranslated as in the beginning. In Hebrew, the in the beginning would actually be Hatchala. Bereshit means at the helm, Barosh, at the head of all importance. So Bereshit means that at the head of all importance is the creation of heaven and earth, the spiritual and the physical. But what it really means is the letter Bet is the number 2, because in Jewish math, the equation works as follows. 1 plus x equals 2. X equals 0. In other words, that which creates free will or choice is a choice between 1, which already existed pre-creation, and 0, which means that free will is really a choice between reality and illusion. It's the echad, it's the center, and it is everything other than the center. And that is this idea that if you think about this, I mean, I think about this a lot. Just imagine, I mean, there had to be a moment in time, right, where all of a sudden, I don't even know if there's a verb for this, but let's say all of a sudden, God, pre-creation is, he's Godding, right? It's just kind of like Godding. And then all of a sudden, there had to be a moment when God says, oh my me, right? And then, bing, creation is created, right? And then, so the question is, what was it that God did not have pre-creation that God had after creation, right? If God is omni, etc., if God is the infinity of the infinities, which ironically in advanced mathematics, the symbol for that is the aleph. So if God is this everything, so what could God create? What was it that God didn't have that God had to create? MTV. Not only that, where would God put it? No, can't put it over there. I'm over here also. No, I'm over here as well. No, I'm still there. Where would God put this thing that God didn't have? So the only thing that God did not have is lack. So the only thing that God creates is lack. But God creates lack. In Kabbalah, we call this the tzimtzum, which means contraction. That God contracts or removes herself from a certain area in the universe so as to create a void where there is no God. But that would be impossible, because then that would no longer be God. That would be a big dude. I wouldn't want to mess with something like that. But it's not God. God is always, at all times, everywhere, everything. So therefore, God creates the perfect lack because it lacks nothing. It's only an illusion of a lack. Where does that illusion exist? Here. That's the only place that illusion, right? You can go to the Upper West Side of New York on a Sunday and see a long line of Jewish kids waiting to talk to their therapists to try to figure out who they are. But you'll never see like a long line of pigeons waiting to talk to therapists. It's because like pigeons don't go through existential crises. Only people, and mostly Jews, go through this like, who are we? What are we? You know, I don't know if you remember this show, but I loved the show when I was a kid. This is back in the days of black and white TV. It was called Supermarket Sweep. I know they made a later version, but the original version is before they woke up and said, maybe we better do this in the studio. We could get sued. And they used real supermarkets. And the first half of the show, instead of winning like, I don't know, cars or toys or planets, you won time. And the person with the most amount of time, they brought him in the supermarket. You had, let's say, 5 minutes. They put lime around the cash register. The guy would show up like in his Keds, because they didn't have Nike in those days. And they would knock off the starter gun, and you had 3 minutes. Whatever you could get into that little area was yours. So this guy would run for the stakes like frisbees. He'd be rolling turkeys down like bowling balls, moving. Bam! The clock would go off. Whatever he got, that's what he had. Now just imagine the person who gets up to that line and the gun goes off and he runs over to the toothpicks. Should I get the wooden ones? Should I get the plastic ones? But the wooden ones will support an Indian reservation, Arizona, but the plastic ones are, yeah. And the family's yelling out, forget the freaking toothpicks. Go for the steaks. And he says, hey, toothpicks, this is like a real important part of my life, you know? Or even better is the guy who gets up to the line and the gun goes off and he can't move. He says, go! He says, well, how do I even know this is real? Maybe I'm just like a dream in a hippopotamus. How do I even know any of this is for real? So that's what happens to us in a way. We are these very, very, very high elevated souls. We are like miners with a light on our helmet. We come into the darkest place in all of the universe, and we have an opportunity to bring great light into this world. But at the same time, we have an amnesia that we necessarily lose purpose and focus, and the clock is always ticking. You know, we're all sentenced to life on this planet. And as we understand more and more what our opportunity is, we take advantage of those opportunities to be able to grow within ourselves, and from growing within ourselves to be able to generate that light outside. This is hinted at even in the nature of the physical body of a person represents the name of God. This name we talked about before of the name of now is the letters Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. It has the letters Hey twice. Hey is the number 5. It represents the 2 hands. The Vav is like a pipe that goes from the higher world to the lower world. That is the body. And the Yud is the only, or Yid, the Yud is the only letter that does not touch the Hebrew baseline, because it represents the highest of spiritual ideas. And that's why it correlates to the head. And that's why the head has 7 holes, because these 7 holes correlate to the 7 days of creation. On the 6 outer points, you have 3 sets of pairs. You have 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils. The primary function of these holes are input. They are absorbing the information of the 6 days, but they are absorbing it through the letter Bet of the duality that God created, so that a person's able to judge and able to see the 2 sides of every issue, because something which is whole is 2 sides unified. But the 7th hole is the mouth, and the mouth is only one, and it sits in the middle of the head because it is connected to the heart, and its primary function is to speak. The human being is defined as the medaber, the one that communicates. And so therefore the information of the world of the 6-day work week comes into my head. I analyze that information. I put it under the human touch of the scales of the heart, and then the heart speaks through the mouth one truth. That composition is how we as human beings represent a godly light into this world, by being able to take those concepts and to make them exist in this world. And this is what we refer to as the moral 5th dimension. The moral 5th dimension means that while as we live in a world that has height, width, length, and time, there's a 5th dimension, which is the moral dimension. The moral dimension is that every human being, all of us, at each moment in our lives are making decisions. And the question is, are we making those decisions to go in a direction of growing in holiness, or are we making those decisions in a way that steal that opportunity? In the Hasidic world, they always say that there's nothing called bad. There's only that which is called sad. And the reason that it's sad is because sad means lost opportunity. That which brings joy to a person is when a person maximizes what their opportunity has to be able to afford them. And this is hinted at, in a way, in the story of Noah. I mean, think about this. It's kind of a funny story. I mean, you have Noah, I think you say in English, Noah is building an ark. It takes him 120 years to build an ark. I mean, obviously, God is not going to go into the shipping industry at that rate. But God is telling him, build an ark for 120 years, because in Judaism, we always say that the average life is Ad Me'esrim. May you live until 120. By the way, I'm sure you know the joke. What do you wish somebody on their 120th birthday? Have a nice day. So the person lives for 120 years. I was wondering if that one would slip through. The person has a life of 120 years. What he's really doing with his life is he is building an ark for traveling outside of this world. In the Zohar, we are taught that when a soul is born in this world, it's like the sun. But if it manipulates its passage through this world, on the other side of death, it becomes an entire solar system. And the way that which we go through that process, the word in Hebrew for ark, teva, is the same word in Hebrew for word, one of the words for word. That the little words that come out of our mouth, these are little arks where we put our soul into these words. And these words last forever. They go into the infinite, because that which is in the level of sound is linked all the way to the original sound of creation. It's infinite sound. Sound is that which comes from the higher world, dips into the lower world, and returns. And that's why in that level of purifying speech, by elevate speech, that's, like we said before, is the leaving of the pharaoh, of the evil mouth behind, and coming to a higher, holier mouth. That experience is because the soul's elevating itself. And that process of elevating itself happens in this metaphor of the ark. Now, the ark's dimensions were, again, I think you call them in English cubits. We call them amot or amos. But the idea is that they were 50 amot wide, 30 amot high, and 300 amot long. And these numbers in Kabbalah mean the following. We said before that the 49 is the ultimate of the world of space and time, right? 7 days, 7 positions of space and time is 49. When you transcend the number 49, you come to 50. 50 is the infinite. That's why the holiday of Shavuot, just to pick up on that point that I left off before, is on the 50th day. Because when one reaches into the 50, they go beyond time and space. And this is in the Hebrew word nevuah. Nevuah means nun ba. Nun is the Hebrew letter of 50. The word prophecy in Hebrew means one who has arrived at the number 50. Therefore, Shavuot is receiving of the infinite wisdom of the Torah, because one is no longer bound inside the physical world. And so too, the idea of the ark being within 50 amot means that the finite world is inside the infinite world, which means that at every moment of our lives, we have the ability to join the infinite to the finite in the ultimate now. That power to illuminate the physical world with this kind of a spiritual light, this is hinted at by the fact that the world was created in that letter bet to create the illusion between the aleph, or the illusion of nothingness. The last letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the letter tuf. These two letters are the spectrum of that creation. But when one can place light and wisdom in the middle of that, which is the letter Yud, as we said before, like the head, Berosh, Bereshit, that which has wisdom and that which is above the physical world, when you place that in this world, you spell the word house, Beth Shalom, Bayit, we say in modern Hebrew. That idea of a home means that one has been able to create within the physical world an illumination of spirituality. The word shalom also is a very interesting word. I think the problem is in English, many people think that the way you spell peace is P-I-C-E, because everybody keeps telling us in Israel, give it back another piece, give them another piece. And somehow by giving all these little pieces, I think, however, what peace means is when you learn how to piece all the pieces together. That's when you have real peace. Because the word for peace in Hebrew, shalom, is the same word as the word shalem, which means whole. So, in fact, if you want to think about it, the way to be a holy Jew is W-H-O-L-L-Y. because to be holy means to be able to take the spiritual world and the physical world and put them together. So much so that, again, this is symbolized in the Star of David. The triangle, let's call it like this, the upper triangle represents the spiritual world, which we might call heaven. And the whole purpose of heaven is to try to find a physical manifestation for it in the physical world, in the world of reality. The earthly world, the physical world, is searching for a way to find an expression in eternity as a spiritual entity. So you have a spiritual reality looking for physical form, and you have a physical world looking for spiritual identity. Now, the beauty and the harmony of this world, which is what this Star of David represents, is that if in the physical world we lose that sense of balance, if we go too far over here, then the heavenly world will respond over here. And its purpose will be to bring back the balance. And conversely, if we go too far here, the heavenly world will function over here, and it will bring back the balance. But the idea is to always create that harmony and that balance. In fact, the ultimate level, the Maharal explains, is to realize that there is nothing miraculous about the spiritual world. The spiritual world is completely scientific. It has algorithms, it has schematics, it has formulas, and there is nothing mysterious about the spiritual world. And yet at the same time, there is nothing natural about the physical world. There is nothing natural about nature. Nature is perpetually miraculous. So there is what Rabbi Soloveitchik once said. He said, don't refer to creation as the Garden of Paradise, rather refer to it as the Garden of Paradox. That there's a paradox between a physical world, which is completely miraculous, and a spiritual world, which is totally natural. And by blending those two planes down into one, ultimately, we reach a center point. That center point is the point we call echad. And that is how we do it through the word of sound. This, by the way, is the spiritual metaphor behind the classical image, we'll wrap up here, of the idea of the Messiah coming on the white donkey. The word Messiah in Hebrew is pronounced Mashiach. The Mashiach literally just means the anointed one. But the actual letters of the word Mashiach also spell the words Yismach, which means joy. As the Rambam says, if you meet a person who's very wise in spirituality, but they are not filled with joy, then they are nothing more than a donkey carrying books. They have all the wisdom there in the saddles, but unless they have joy, then the soul has not connected to the wisdom. So therefore, the highest level of wisdom is expressed through joy. That's why the letters of the word Messiah means joy. But the same letters of the word Messiah, Mashiach, is also in numerology the word for snake, Nachash. So in the original Garden of Eden, when God, just think about this, all right? Here's Adam, it's his first day, Garden of Eden, right? GE, everything has like that ode de nous, like little rabbit hasn't made his first jump yet, And like everything is like amazing, kind of like the way your car smells when you first buy it. And here comes Adam home from a hard day working in the Garden of Eden, and his wife has a meal. I mean, he thought she's a nice Jewish girl from Borough Park. What does he know? And next thing he finds out, she's feeding him treif apples, right? And so he's eating these apples, she's eating these apples, and God comes along and says, hey, que pasa, senor? What's going on here? Now, what does that mean? What does it mean when God says to Adam and Eve, what have you done? I mean, where were you, God? Shuffleboard in Miami? The little beeper goes beep, 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 beep. Trouble in the Garden of Eden. All right, Adam throws him up against the tree, frisks him, finds an apple core. I mean, what does this mean when God comes along and says to them, what have you done? it was really a way, which is why the word ayecha is the same language as the word echa that we say on Lamentations, because the purpose of this world is not for God to tell us what to do. It's for us to become a mensch and know what to do. So God was sort of asking us in a way that we would reflect upon ourselves. So Adam turns around and says, yo, man, it wasn't me, it was the chick. And not only that, you sent it to me, and she still gave me these 3 apples. And then God turns to Eve, and what does Eve do? Oh, hey, it wasn't me, it was Vinny, the snake, right? Of course, Vinny never has a day in court. He's just zapped and he slithers out. But the real question is, what was the original sin from a Jewish perspective? It was not sinning. Guess what, guys? To sin is to be human. Welcome to Earth. The original sin was arrogance. The inability to say, I've made a mistake, I am sorry. The inability to take responsibility for being human and saying, oh, yeah, I did make a mistake. And that's why the word ego, somebody once said to me, ego is the acronym of the words edging God out. That when a person is filled with himself, there's no room for God. So that was the problem, that Adam and Eve had an ego front. And the only cure for ego, death. They were supposed to live forever. Instead, there came death. But here's the really interesting thing. God then says, let's get rid of them because now they might take from the tree of life and live forever. So what does God do? He does like the little spinning blade thing and the little hovering angels. Now, what's going on here? 2 minutes ago, we just watched God in 7 days create an amazing universe. He couldn't just pluck out the tree of life? Huh, I'll just hold it over here near Pluto. They'll never get it that way. What's with the little spinning blade thing? So if you read the language carefully, it doesn't say to protect the tree. It says to protect the path to the tree. God wanted them to come back. God wants somebody to take hold of the tree of life. He wants us to do it in the right way. So this blade was only to stop them coming back with that arrogance. But if they come back with the humble humility of just being human, allowing ourselves to make mistakes and turning our mistakes into growing processes to make us into better people so that we take advantage of this little finite entity called life, to that, the door is always open. And this is the symbolism of the Messiah. The Messiah can be taking the life force and, God forbid, blowing it, which is the idea of it being the same numerical value of snake, or to take that life force and to convert it into the fact that we are an infinite entity living within a finite world. We are spiritual beings that have a physical form that enable us to perform actions and speech of the highest order, and that will bring us great joy. And that idea of riding on a white donkey, the idea of the white symbolizes purity, and the word in Hebrew for donkey, chamor, is the same word as the word chomer, which means physical. That the idea of the Mashiach, or the idea of a spiritually evolved person, is called a horseback rider. Somebody who's learned how to balance their spirituality on top of a physical world. That's the horseback rider, that's the Mashiach on the donkey. And that's why the same word for donkey, which also means chomer, physical, has the numerical value of the number 248, which are the 248 limbs of the human being's body. And that's why there are 248 words in the prayer, which is the Jewish alma mater called Shema Yisrael. Because by the 248 words, each one of these words reverberates through its sound into each one of our limbs and opens up the portals to receive that divine light from which we bring into this world real shalom, because we have made everything whole. We have created a bayit, a house from which there is shalom, and the shalom dwells in the house. As the Gemara in Brachas says, when God looked for a vessel from which to hold blessing, that vessel was shalom. So I know my buddy Dean always likes to say goodbye to me by saying Om Shalom, but as a Jew over here in Jerusalem, I'll just say Oi Shalom. And thank you very, very much. If there are any questions, I'm sure Dean will be happy to. No, I'm
Gedalia,
serious.
that was perfect.
I thank you very much for the opportunity.
You know, Gedalia, already there's a request for you to be sort of our perpetual rabbi in residence in Jerusalem. And you don't, you may take lightly the fact that your mom was connected to us many years ago and lived here, but the connection is very deep. What you were just talking about resonates 100% with the people here, and
Oh,
in all seriousness, I think that we would love to have you speak to us on a regular basis. It was just totally a joy, just wonderful. So
well,
consider that. You don't have to you don't have to
I would,
promise right away.
I would have to talk to the Mora de Asra of your shul, but I would certainly be more than happy and honored to.
Wonderful. So let's see if anybody has questions. Hold on.
The first question that everyone must know is, are there moose in Israel?
On the t-shirt. Well, there's chocolate mousse. The truth is I could say this because my wife isn't here, but I always jokingly say that I was married in hell, critical pause, Sinki, because my wife is from Finland. So that's what this is actually Sears says, Lapland, Finland. So
Great.
I'll tell you like this, when I see moose in Israel, you know the Messiah is here.
Does anybody have questions?
Oh, we do have
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, why don't you come over here?
Yeah, my question is about the Messiah. Is the Messiah a real person or is it an idea?
That's a very good question. In fact, I have to tell you, it was only 8 months ago, I stumbled on a Talmud which not only talks about the Messiah, but it talks about the Messiah's children and even Messiah grandchildren. And as a Jew, I immediately saw a whole new clothing line opportunity coming down the pike here. But again, the actual word Messiah in Hebrew means anointed, of which there were thousands of Messiahs. In other words, every high priest who worked in the first or second temple had to be anointed by oil. That anointing means the anointed one. They were all of the kings of Israel. There were different ways in which they were, but the kings had to be anointed by oil. Today, or actually not just today, but for a long time, when a person becomes a rabbi, the term is called smicha, which actually means to lean or to place upon. But the smicha of ancient days also was done with a certain type of oil. It was a requirement on certain levels inside of the Sanhedria. So the technical term Mashiach simply means an anointed one. The conceptual idea of Mashiach, however, is very much physical because there are two places in the Talmud that discuss, actually there are several places, but there are two of those several places that discuss an idea called a Messiah from the tribe of Joseph, as opposed to the Messiah from the tribe of Judah, or what we call the David. And the Messiah of the tribe of Joseph legendarily has the potential of actually being assassinated. In fact, King David prays to God that he does not die like the Messiah we call Mashiach ben Yosef, the Messiah of the tribe of Joseph. So these are very real people, and they have very real functions. The Rambam puts it in his laws, where he says that the three primary functions of the Messiah is, one, the ingathering of the exiles; two, the war of Gog and Magog. I think our Christian cousins call it Armageddon. And three, that he builds the third temple, or according to Rashi in several sources in Shas, the third temple actually comes prefabbed from heaven, but means that he prepares the way for the temple to come. But yes, a very human, very real person.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the talk a lot. I just missed a little when you were talking about the way in which I think the term Nachash, serpent, how it gets derived or permuted from other words. So if you could just go through that again, and I'd appreciate hearing that again.
Of course. The word Nachash, numerically, right? Okay, I'll just say this in a simple idea. Do you remember Oh gosh, what year did we learn chemistry? Was that 11th grade, 10th grade? I don't remember anymore. But once upon a time, we all walked into our classroom and we saw the periodic chart on the wall. And everyone said, "Oh, I must be in the wrong room. I'm not here for English. I'm here for science." And somebody said, "No, no, no, this is science." And then you wonder, well, why are all those letters up there on the wall? And then you find out, well, what the C is really for carbon, and this is for that, right? So in Hebrew, we believe that it's not that there are Hebrew letters, there are forms. In fact, I'll do it like this. There's a form that if you hold this form like this, it's the letter E, but if you turn it over this way, it's the number 3. So the idea is that each form has a letter equivalent and a number equivalent. Now, what does this mean? This means that there are 2 ways to look at words. You can look at them from the letter performance, so that 3 letters spelling Nachash create an image of a serpent or a snake, or you could look at these letters as a mathematical algorithm. The Nun is a 50, the Shin is 300, and then the Chet is an 8, and what do these numbers mean? So it's not that these are numbers applied to letters. It's the same vessel in 2 different aspects, and each of them reveals something about their essence. So when you have a common numerical value between one algorithm or one state of being and another one, it means that they share properties. So the numerical value of the word Messiah, Mashiach, is the same value as the word Nachash. That means there must be an innate power that they share, but it's like a double-edged sword. And I will, since you asked this, I didn't want to, as Dean will tell you, my problem is I can give 30-hour-long classes and never breathe. But I was trying to be as condensed as possible. But since you've asked this, when Moses comes to Pharaoh, he's carrying a staff. He takes the staff and he throws it on the ground and it turns into a serpent. And all of Pharaoh's sorcerers say, I could do that in kindergarten. And they all throw their sticks on the ground and they all become serpents. If you read the Hebrew carefully, it does not say that Moses' serpent swallowed their serpents. It says that Moses' staff swallowed their serpents. What does this mean? So if you go back a little bit with Moses at the burning bush, again, Moses has the stick. God tells him to throw the stick down. It turns into the snake. He takes hold of the snake. It becomes a stick. This means that there is raw power in this world. That power in the hand of a righteous person becomes a staff through which good things can happen. That power out of the hand of a righteous person becomes the snake, which is a very dangerous power. So that's the same idea. It's like nuclear energy. It's just a question of how you use it. It's not innately bad, but it's innately powerful. So the Nachash represents the epitome of that misused energy, whereas the holy man, the tzaddik, represents the staff, which is the, let's say, the culmination of the Messiah, that idea in its most powerful, pure form. So that's the correlation between Nachash as snake and the idea of the Messiah as the elevated form of that same energy. And this is hinted at, if you want to see something very interesting, the middle letter of the entire Torah is, this is a Gemara in Kedushin on 31a, I think, if you want to look it up. The Gemara says that the middle letter of the entire Torah is the letter Vav in the word Gichon, which means serpent. And if you look at that Vav, you'll notice in your Torah that it's big. It's a big Vav. Why? Because there are 2 types of Torah. There is a Torah of letters and there's a Torah of words. In a world of letters, everything is perfect. If I say to everyone in that room right now, visualize the letter T. Okay, maybe someone will have a serif, some will have sans serif, but everyone will basically have a T. But if I take 4 letters and I say visualize T-R-E-E, well, one person might have a maple, one person might have a spruce, right? Suddenly, when you get into the world of words, it's open to interpretation. So the Torah of letters is middle letter is the vav of the word snake. It means that the most evil power in the world is rectified to be used as good. It finds its harmony and its balance. The middle words of the Torah, because there's an even amount of words, you're going to have two words for the middle, ironically is the same word twice. Doresh, dorash, which means to hunt. When you're in the world of words, you have to hunt for meaning. It'll no longer be obvious. You have to dig beneath the surface. That's why we call it Beit Midrash, the world of going beneath the surface through study. So in brief, that's what the idea of the snake is. The snake represents all of the energy in this world, which, like everything in the world, is created for good. It just needs to be rectified, which is symbolized by that vav in the middle word.
And that brings to mind the serpent energy of the spiritual energy that is also represented by the serpent of the spine, the kundalini. That's when the serpent's working on the spiritual level.
Absolutely. In fact, you find this is a very famous biblical metaphor, which you might enjoy. I mean, what happened was there was a terrible plague among the Jewish people, and Moses takes a pole and he wraps a copper snake around the pole, which becomes the symbol that you use in America today for the American Medical Society. That's a biblical symbol, because the word in Hebrew for copper is nachash, which is the same word as snake, nachash. So copper and snake has to do with conductivity, and that energy through conductivity of copper, and that symbol of the snake going up at pole is exactly that. It's that positive. It's using the snake serpent to cure, serum rather, to cure, for sure, absolutely.
I had a question here, since we seem to be on the subject of Moshiach, which is, from the Jewish perspective, there's almost like a trivialization of what, either from Talmudic or better yet from Kabbalah, what was the Jewish perception of Yeshua? Why was he not considered the Moshiach? And just what's our perception of him from a traditional perspective, and that whole story wrapped around that? I'm very curious.
Yeah, well, the simple answer is that the reason he was not accepted as Mashiach is because, as I mentioned before, the three criteria that the Rambam brings down as to what are the functions of the Mashiach, let's say in a completely non-emotional environment, purely analytical, one analyzing, hey, you're going to be the president of the United States, these are your jobs, this is what you have to do, and this is your responsibilities. So the function of the Mashiach has three simple level definitions. One, the ingathering of the exiles. Two, the ultimate war after which there will be no war. And three, the rebuilding of the temple. So none of those functions actually occurred under his auspices. Now, who he was, what he was he a brilliant philosopher? Was he a very evolved spiritual person? Was he a very holy man? All of those things, I don't even judge people I know personally, certainly could never judge people I've never met. So I have no way of passing any comment on that. I don't think he was the villain that sometimes the Jewish people try to make him to be. But he certainly did not fulfill the simple definition of what the title Mashiach would be, which is why the Jews who have lived, breathed 3 times a day in their, I remember once, by the way, back in the 70s, there was a movement among the Christians called Born Again, and they had bumper stickers which said, "I found it." And the Lubavitchers came out with a bumper sticker that says, "We never lost it." Because there has been a unbroken chain of this Mount Sinai experience. If you ever want to read a wonderful book on the subject, it's in English. It's called the Kuzari. The Kuzari was the king of Kuzar, probably, I don't know, maybe the great-great-grandfather of Barat, I don't know. But he was in Kazakhstan, and he was deciding which way to bring his people. And the book is about a Christian, a Muslim, and a rabbi who make their presentations. And the Kuzari says to the rabbi, "Tell me something about creation." And so the rabbi says, "Well, it says that in the Torah, so-and-so and so-and-so, but I only know this because I know it because this is what Moses taught us." And he said, "Well, what do you mean that Moses taught you?" And the answer is that none of us were actually at creation. So none of us really know exactly what happened at creation. But we were all in millions, not just a couple hundred people, but in millions at Mount Sinai. And from that day on, for 3,300 plus years, every single day, in every society, in every country in the world, throughout every language ever spoken, there have been our people who have been tortured and gone through all kinds of situations because we have insisted on maintaining this transmission. But within that transmission is something which we witnessed at Sinai as a revelation from God. And within that included the context as to what is the Messiah. So it's only that we can base ourselves upon.
Okay, yeah, more questions? Let's see.
Sure.
Sheila.
I think the mic is here.
Hi, Sheila
Hi.
Ross. I've really been enjoying this, but
Thank you.
my Talmudic mind keeps asking, how does he know that's true? How does he know that's true? How does he know that's true? And I know that it's like listening to competing movie reviews. This person says, this is what the movie means. That person says, this is what the movie means. And it's for me, it's a conundrum in Judaism that it's not some personal experience in consciousness that this is the way the universe works because I received that transmission. It's the mind constantly seeking to understand through words and the intellect what something means. How do you know the white donkey means purity? How do you know the man sitting on the donkey means this and this? And I'm sure there's 1,000 other interpretations of it as well. How does that work for you to be satisfying? It's not satisfying to me. How does it work for you?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. You have a great Talmudic mind. You will love learning the Talmud. It's made for you. But I have to tell you, you remind me of the joke, and I apologize if you know this one, but you know the joke about the rabbi who's doing marriage therapy? And
No.
So the couple comes in, first he's listening to the husband kvetch and kvetch and kvetch. And after a while, the rabbi says, yeah, you know, you're right. And then the wife comes in and she kvetches and kvetches and kvetches. And after a while, he says, gee, you know what? You're right. And then the rabbi's wife comes and says, what kind of rabbi are you? How could they both be right? And he turns to her and says, yeah, you're right. I agree with you. There's nothing more dangerous than a monopoly on truth. And I certainly am the last person to profess having such a monopoly on truth. However, within any science or within any form of which we communicate and function within a world, we have things called language. Now, language on one level, let's say on a simple level, is you and I agree to call these glasses. Now, we could call them frogs. We could call them aliens from other planets. It really doesn't matter. But what matters is that you and I agree on what we're going to call this in order that we can now communicate more on that subject. If we can't find a common denominator for what this is called, then it's hard to then go into higher levels of bifocal, contact lenses, different types of frames, sunglasses, underwater glasses. We can't get there because we don't have a certain platform. Just like in technology, you need a platform from which you move. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily the only platform, and it doesn't even mean it's a correct platform, but it's a functioning platform. So there is certainly a validity in the transmission of this platform from Sinai that can be, for one who really wishes to. Don't forget, my rabbi always told me, better a good question than a bad answer. And one of the reasons that the Talmud Babylon became the backbone Talmud as opposed to the Jerusalem Talmud is because the Jerusalem Talmud only gives you the law. It says halacha aleph, halacha bet, halacha gimel. It's just the bottom line. Whereas the Babylonian Talmud could also jump to the bottom line, but it will not do that. It will go off on certain ways of building in order for you to see the thread of thought, because it was more important to the Babylonian Talmud for you to understand how to analyze and how to be analytical in understanding an idea, so that when new ideas come up in your generation, rather than simply quoting dogma, you have an ability to apply an eternal wisdom. So that's at least the thinking. So there is a way to one who wishes to engage in this study that somebody can really show sources. And these sources stem and stem and stem and stem. Now, you're right. Who knows if those sources are correct? Who knows if those sources have multiple? They probably do. But at least those threads are also threads. So the question really is, on each one of those threads, to what degree can a person validate their sources? And then, I mean, it's sort of like you have doctors. A doctor is looking at a patient. You can have numerous second, third, fourth opinions. You know, I remember the story of a guy who comes into the doctor, and the doctor does a check and says, "Oh my gosh, you're going to die in 24 hours if you don't take this medicine." He freaks out, runs to another doctor for a second opinion. And then that doctor says, "Oh my gosh, you're fine. If you take that medicine, you're going to die." Now, where does he go? Okay. So you have two people analyzing the same situation in a very serious situation, coming up with two completely different analytical results. Doesn't mean they could actually both be right. They could both be wrong, or neither could be right or neither wrong. But that you feel a certain assumption that the doctor has done his homework or her homework, come to their conclusion. I mean, what would be the stupid thing to do would be to now quickly run out and go to pharmacology school and spend the next 8 years trying to understand the nature of this medicine. I mean, you could do that, but in that case, the guy might no longer be alive. But the point is, there's a certain faith in the science, because the science has a methodology that's available to somebody who wishes to really analyze it. So again, we don't know. We live in a world of the unknowing. I mean, this is the whole idea of the sukkah. The sukkah comes to teach us faith in God. What's the first minimal level, the absolute minimal of a sukkah? 2 walls with a handbreadth of a third pole. Why? Because before you have that little piece there, it's 50-50. There's 2 walls. Oh, I see God's hand. 2 walls. I don't see any God. Maybe yes, maybe no. The minute it's 51-49, now you're in the sukkah. But that's a question of understanding. That's a question of faith, and that's a question of how we grow it and develop. But yes, I bless you that your Talmudic mind should never cease to question, but don't stay with the question. The question should lead to answers, and the answers should lead to more questions, and they should lead to better answers, because that's the beauty of living. As Jews, we never believe in being. We believe in becoming, and becoming is a lifelong process. Nobody ever is it in their life. It's always a process of becoming more and becoming more. And it's a process of breathing in the world around us and then giving it back. And that is the heartbeat of how we live in this world. And that's why we become older and we become wiser. And if you're Bob Dylan, you say, "I was so much older than that now." But that otherwise is really the process. It's the thinking and the questioning. And if we had more time, I would sit down and open up my sources and invite you to challenge them. I don't know if you've ever walked into a yeshiva, but a yeshiva is not a library. Nobody's sitting there quietly reading books. They're yelling, screaming, banging on the table, arguing with each other. And that's called learning.
That's my worst nightmare. That's my worst nightmare.
Oh, no, it's fun.
I don't feel in any of this kind of engagement with the mind and the intellect and figuring out, I don't feel attracted to that. I feel attracted to going within, transcending the mind, transcending thought, and actually experiencing what you're talking about, the transmission from Sinai, because that's really the only thing I would trust as truth. So it feels like, you know, people running around chasing their tails to me, and I'm not trying to be offensive in any way, but is there some area of Judaism that talks about this, that really the knowledge of God is within, and it doesn't come from direct experience. Direct experience. It doesn't come from some other famous rabbi's interpretation of some incomplete text that doesn't really give us all the material. For example, I can't imagine what made you think that that Adam and Eve were filled with ego. I mean, there could be a million other interpretations of what happened there because nobody's telling us what actually happened there. As you said earlier, we really don't know what actually happened. So I don't feel attracted to keep on exploring and questioning and questioning. I want to feel the truth from within me, and I'm sorry if I'm going on because I find this actually fascinating. But why is it that Judaism doesn't respect, in general, from what I've experienced, the transmission of other cultures and religions like Sinai? Why do they think only the Sinai transmission was something that's true and real, but other cultures' experience of that is not correct? Why isn't it an equal thing?
Well, I fortunately never had that experience. In fact, I have a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that says that there is wisdom all over the world. And if somebody comes from any nation and says that they have wisdom, respect that wisdom. And I historically look at the fact that the way that the Jews and the Greeks initially unified with each other to the point where the Greek language can even be used in Holy Scripture. You could write the Megillah Esther in the Greek language. So, I mean, if you believe in one God, then this one God creates all human beings. There's not like a God of the Chinese and a God of the Africans and they're fighting for market share. There's only one God. And
Sure
so
looks like
so that one God loves all human beings equally. I mean, one of the biggest mistakes, if I could digress for a second, is people think that the Jews regard themselves as the chosen people. That is wrong. The word in the Bible is called Am Segula. A segula is a remedy. It means that there is something that this particular nation, the children of Abraham, have been given an opportunity that they could bring a healing into the world.
I really love that. I love that.
But that's not to say that it negates, God forbid. I mean, God spoke that there were non-Jewish prophets as well. God is involved with all human beings. Now, as to what you said, the intellectual versus, let's call it the experiential state of being. Again, I only was supposed to talk for a half hour. I think I've gone on for 6 days now. But
no, it only feels like 6 days.
Exactly. Right. Intellectually it feels like 5 minutes. But there are huge, vast oceans of Jewish literature on exactly what you're speaking about. I mean, if you study the writings of Abulafia and you go into the 13th century Kabbalists and you see what they were all about, it was not a Talmudic kind of an environment in the least. And in fact, the Baal Shem Tov talks about that the highest level of all being is the level of nothingness.
Yeah.
In fact, we hint at this. I will just say briefly, the holiest day, according to the Kabbalists, of the year is Purim. Are you familiar with the holiday of Purim?
Sure.
Okay. No, I'll tell you why. Because people always say, the Talmud says, where does the word Purim come from? Because the word Pur in Persian means a lot. So Haman threw a lottery. But I say no, that the holiday comes from the fact you're supposed to get drunk, so you keep pouring them all day long. That's the real source of the word. But people didn't want everyone getting too slashed, thou shalt get ripped. But the idea is that you have the Sabbath of all Sabbaths, the mother of all Shabbat, is called Yom Kippur. But if you break down the word, Yom is a day, Ki means like, Pur. That Yom Kippur is only a day which is like Pur. Purim is plural. The root of Purim is Pur. So in a way, this day of Yom Kippur is telling you, yeah, I'm a great day, but there's a day greater than me. What is that day? Purim. Why? Because on Yom Kippur, you get to be like an angel. You don't eat, you don't drink, you become an angel. You detach yourself from the physical world. But on Purim, you become a human, which is even greater than an angel, because then you come to the level of being completely submersed in the physical world. And if you could find spirituality there, that's even greater than an angel. And so what is the highest level of Purim's wisdom? It's called in Hebrew, and I'll translate it, Ad Shelo Yada, until you do not know. that the highest level of wisdom is knowing you do not know. And therefore, when you realize that the encounter with wisdom is really the encounter of the infinite, so it's kind of like the higher you go, the further you see. The further you see, the more you know you don't know. And so, therefore, it actually, and this is why a truly spiritually evolved person becomes humble. It's not because they're playing being humble, it's just because they're shrunk from the enormity of the mind's opening to where it goes. But then the mind can't sit there as an intellectual game, it has to produce rain. And that rain has to come into a heart that produces love. And that rain, that water, and that fire of compassion is actually the word in Hebrew for heaven, Shemayim. Shemayim is Mayim, which is water, and Aish, together, heaven. And so when we say in Shema Israel, we say, may you make your days on this world, on earth, like heaven. Meaning what? May you be able to find a way to resolve conflict and bring peace into this world where even fire and water can live together in harmony. But yes, absolutely. It's not just to be a mind game, for sure. And the idea of the feeling and getting in touch with yourself is 100% correct. This is what I alluded before when I said that Adam was listening to the sound inside the animals. Well, if you heard the sound of God's voice inside the animal, certainly imagine the sound you could hear inside ourselves of God's voice. This is hinted at when Eliyahu, was hiding in the cave, and God says, I'm going to appear. First, there's a big earthquake, and then there's a tornado, and then there's this huge like firestorm. And God says, no, I'm not in any of those things. And then there was like this little quiet voice, and that's where God was. So that's the inner voice, absolutely correct. That's that inner voice that the more that we can learn to listen to that voice, the more that we connect with ourselves. So I'm in agreement with you.
I request our next visit together to go further into these concepts from the 13th century and what the Jewish point of view is and all of that, because that's, in my Jewish upbringing and education, that was completely obscured, if not non-existent altogether.
Oh, what a shame. You know, I will just tell you to Google the name R.E.A. Kaplan.
Okay.
He's unfortunately passed away about 15, 20 years ago, but he was a man who translated into very modern English many of the writings of Abulafia and other. He has a book called Kabbalah and Meditation, and you might find that writing very illuminating.
You'll be interested to know that we have some members of our congregation actually studied with R.E.A. Kaplan back in the 80s, I believe.
Wow.
Who was
That's
that?
super.
The Bresners.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
That's fine. Thank you all very much. This was really wonderful. And regards from my mom, and Dean, you're the man.
No. You're the man.
Dean's the man.
So,
Dean's the man.
Gedalia, you are now indelibly and permanently a part of our show, and we really, truly look forward to more of these sorts of talks. It's just totally nourishing and wonderful. So let's do it again soon.
Very stimulating.
Very stimulating. Let's do it again
Thank
soon.
you. All right. God bless.
Sei gesund. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.